The way that I would address that is I would say, again, that is part of the informed consent. People need to understand it's much like email. So when people sign an email consent, I say, look, you send me whatever you want. You can tell me the whole story of the argument and who did what and said what and all that. I'm happy to do that. I'm not going to send you that kind of level of response back because I'm going to say that for our session. That's not super secure because we don't have an encrypted email system. But you need to understand that it is a risk. You could accidentally send it to your kid's teacher when you thought you sent it to me. That's just part of that. But I'm happy to communicate with that way. Telehealth is the same. I'm going to use a HIPAA-compliant platform. I'm going to make sure my kids aren't playing on the floor behind me. I'm going to make sure that I'm professional and that I hold space with you. And if this helps, because this is how you want to do therapy, there are risks here. And one of the risks is I can't control all the variables. I can do my best to the best of my abilities. They can't control the variables, all of them. And when people consent to that, they at least know. And I can think of some higher profile people that I have treated over the years that I would probably say, do you have any enemies? Probably. So you might choose to do this because it's convenient and it's all the time you got. And there's always risk. You know, just like there's risk of someone seeing them walking into our office, there's always risk. So the informed consent, I think, is really the crux of that it's new, it's developing, we're working hard on it, we're using vendors that are willing to offer that BAA, and there are parts that we're just not going to be able to control.
I have a question for you around antivirus and security patches. Can you have an up-to-date computer if it's an older computer on an older operating system? Do you have to be constantly buying into the newer technology in order to be up to date on antivirus and security?
You're going to need to have a computer that's fairly recent, I would say. Yeah. So it's you're going to need to be able to update your patches. If you have a Mac, you're going to need current updates. If you have a PC, and Chris can speak more to PC in the PC world, but.
So what I keep my operating system up to date in terms of that operating system, but I'm not willing to get a newer operating system because then I can't use my older.
The older software.
Yeah.
Right.
So can I still? Will it still be secure, or do I?
That'd be a specific question for. Are you on PC or Mac? Or
Mac.
You're on a Mac.
Yeah.
What operating system are you on?
Yeah.
It's before they got into the mountain ranges.
You're a snow leopard or.
I mean, it works fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the encryption, on a Mac,
none
we
of
don't
the
run
Adobe
virus
programs
protection
will-
really. We don't need to, so.
But are they,
And they
is
automatically update.
antivirus still good?
It should be.
It should be if it's
I don't
updated.
see why it
Yeah,
wouldn't be.
if it'll still update. Macs especially, we don't really run into a lot of viruses, thankfully. So it's not really something that you have to worry about as much.
We're
being
not
on a
concerned
Mac,
about
so-
transferring a virus with this process, so we're not transferring
No,
files.
no, you're not transferring
So-
anything.
so we're
It's
not-
as long as
yeah.
your computer's new enough to be able to access the internet, see video. Does it have the the little camera right on it? If you have that kind of a system, you're going to be in good shape. If you're running like Windows 95 from way back 90s, then that might be a little tougher because it may not be able to support the video.
Yeah. And another option too is to purchase a device specific to what your goals are with telemental health. I mean, iPads are $325. I mean, they're much cheaper than they used to be. Surface Pro, I think Surface has a pretty reasonable line.
They started around like $750.
A little, right. So you may decide that that's a cost of doing business that you, whatever system you like, that you invest one way or the other. But you could probably work with an IT consultant. Potentially, I can't remember what ours name is.
I don't remember, but if it's a Mac, I bet Small Dog would answer any questions.
Small Dog
Small Dog will answer your questions. I wouldn't want my 2006 ancient little white MacBook to try to handle this, but 2011, 2012, I mean, I think they would be fine. Macs are pretty
We've got a couple of MacBook Airs, I think circa 2014 that are running just fine with the software.
3 years ago.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Well,
It is, but-
I'm sort of curious, as I'm listening to this.
Yeah.
I'm reasonably tech savvy, but not really, just enough to be dangerous. And I'm wondering, when I look at my practice as a business, and I look at the technology operating costs, the added expense of compliance sources, and return on investment per session, when if I did a comparison of my clinical practice, my current return on investment, is it comparable? Or if you're able, because one of my thoughts is one of my biggest overhead is rent, right? So if I can eliminate that overhead, I can increase my return on investment on my business. So, but does the cost of the technology and all the HIPAA compliant equipment and all the additional liability concerns, does it offset that differential?
So we haven't done a study of that necessarily in our office, so I could give you just some ideas off the cuff. I think like with all, if you look at your business from more of just a right now, anything that you buy, from your office furniture to your computer, chances are your accountant is depreciating. So these would be upfront costs, whether you finance them, and then how they depreciate over the years is something that your business then realizes is a benefit. If you have to go out and lay out $5,000 in technology, I don't know what kind of computer you're buying, but I'd like to come and watch, because that's pretty big. Sophisticated technology is usable. Some of the platforms we're going to show you can be used from your iPhone or from your smartphone. There are some really good technologies that are out there, and again, this is why it's happening now, and it just couldn't get traction 10 years ago in the everyday market. Looking at how is your practice going to change, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. If you could then reduce your days in the office to 3 and have 2 days at home and sublet your space, that's a pretty good return on investment. Or if we have a bumpy winter and we have 3 snow days in a row, that's a lot of lost income that you could realize at home. So I think the technology outlay isn't prohibitive. But it does require us to stay consistent. We should be looking at the Medicaid manuals and staying updated with those kinds of things anyway, just for our own protection. So management-wise, I don't know that there's a lot of other pieces there, but it's certainly some great things to consider. Other questions?
There was another question.
Okay. All right, thanks, Jim. All right, different technologies have different bandwidth requirements. So that bandwidth talks about how you are actually more specific to the pitcher, right? So we don't want pixelated clients. We don't want to be pixelated for them. We don't want to have that weird thing where the video freezes and then the audio keeps going and then it doesn't. So we want to test the software with your client and with yourself. You certainly, from your standpoint, learn so you know how to manage your own technology. Don't learn during the first appointment. You could certainly develop a best practice where you set aside some time during your week where you and new clients spend 15 minutes together troubleshooting computer issues, and they, can you hear me now? And they can hear you, and you can hear them. How's the picture look? In different things like that, so that you can make sure that when you then step into session, you could do the work that you're planning to do without having any technology hiccups. These are general bandwidth recommendations. Amanda, remind me the site that people can go to check their...
You can do it right from Google if you just Google
speedtest.org, is
Yeah,
that
you
the
can just
one?
type in speed test into your search bar, and one will pop right up in Google for
All right. So if you don't know how fast your internet is running, you can go to your Google search and type in speed test, and an application will come up, a website will come up that you can then test and make sure that you're within that. If you have dial-up, this isn't going to work. I don't think anybody has dial-up anymore, but if you have dial-up, it ain't going to work. But if you have DSL, if you have some other things that are, if you live like out in the middle of nowhere on top of a mountain, you want to check this to make sure that you've got the appropriate internet speed. In Vermont, not all of our rural areas have that. And we want that for our clients too. We don't want to get their hopes up. This is going to be the answer to their therapy barriers, and then all of a sudden they connect for that first session and it's a bust. So.
If you have Charter or Xfinity for cable modem, you'll be in good shape.
So cable modem is really
You'll
good,
be
but
fine if you've got Xfinity or Charter.
okay. We have just a few minutes before lunch. So a couple of things I want you to do. I'd like you to spend the last couple minutes, we're going to do a little ethical discussion in your table for about 5 minutes. Then we'll transition to lunch. You'll start seeing staff coming and going, bringing in lunch. The senator should be here. I don't know if she wants to speak before or after lunch, so I will be flexible with that. And lunch is not counted as part of your CEUs, so if you do want to leave, or you do need to leave, by all means, you're welcome to. When you come back from lunch, what you should expect is you will need to sign in again. That's best practice, so that we can document that you were here for both sections, and that if you were ever audited for your CEUs, we can document your attendance, and if we were ever audited for those CEUs, we can also document you were here. Okay? When you come back from lunch, we're going to get right into technology. My colleagues will join me, and we will work on showing you some of these platforms, what they look like, what it looks like from the client side and the practitioner side, so you can look at these examples and see what you like and what you don't. There are a million of them, so you can go home excited and find some that you like. And then we'll also talk about emergencies and how to manage those. We'll do that after the afternoon break, and then we'll be out of here, all right? So, last couple minutes. In your teams, in your tables, I want you to talk about the ethical dilemmas that a client is, the behaviors that that client is demonstrating that cause sort of an ethical concern, privacy concern, in one of 4 situations. So you and your table decide. So the first situation is the client is in your office and you are not there. So the client has come in. We'll assume that there's a way to do that that does not involve your client having a key, okay? So you have to go with me on that. So your client comes in and you have to be off-site for some reason. So there's telehealth session being conducted in that way. The second would be a community session, a community space such as a coffee shop or a library. Libraries have technology, so that might be a place that a client might go to telehealth with you. The third would be the client at home. And the last would be the client is traveling and in some sort of a hotel or a hotel space like that. Could be their hotel room, could be the lobby, you decide. So I want you to talk amongst your team about the concerns that you have about telehealth and doing telemedicine from, we'll just assume you're in a secure location, and how you would communicate that with the client for the purposes of informed consent, and any things you need to make sure the client is aware of and risks that they need to be aware of in that situation. Okay, so we'll take about 5 minutes and then we'll break for lunch. And you decide which situation you want to have. Has removed the telehealth location restrictions, so she's going to talk to us for a few minutes about this, and then we'll move on with our slides, all right?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me to come. I really appreciate your reaching out to me. I represent Chittenden County, and this is actually my first term. This is my first year of my first term. So it's really so exciting and gratifying to me to see that we actually did something that is making a positive impact on folks who are doing such good, important work. I actually got the idea for introducing the bill from a constituent who is in the mental health field. She has a private practice in Burlington, and she reached out to me and to some folks in the House, so there were really kind of two bills that were going parallel for a while. The one in the Senate moved more quickly, and we decided to actually, although it started with just mental health care providers, it expanded because we realized that this whole new technology and the telemedicine world could really help improve access for so many people and connect them with providers in many different fields. And really that to me is the key to this, is that it provides better access to lots of Vermonters, many rural Vermonters who have who may be many, many miles away from hospitals or care centers. But also I'm learning, especially from talking to you today, that there are folks who are maybe suffering from substance abuse issues, who don't have cars, who haven't quite gotten themselves together enough to remember appointments or be able to go regularly to appointments. There are older folks who have mobility issues. There are all kinds of people in all kinds of different situations for whom being able to stay at home and use technology that we have now that can be HIPAA compliant, they can still receive the health care that they need. And so, I'm just very, very pleased. The insurance companies were the ones we were most worried about, actually, as we were taking testimony on the bill. I also serve on the Health and Welfare Committee, so I got to see firsthand, the critiques of the bill and the changes that it went through. But in fact, both Blue Cross Blue Shield and MVP were quite supportive. I think they also felt that it would improve access and improve the ability of folks to get care. And there is actually an app and a platform called Doctor on Demand. I told these folks the wrong word. It's Doctor on Demand, and I have it on my phone now. I mean, it's healthcare providers can subscribe to that service, and the insurance companies are very keen to promote that. So I think once the bill goes into effect, they will try to let people know that that's a possibility as well. So really, again, I'm just very glad to, as a legislator starting out, one of my goals was to really try to come up with practical legislation that makes people's lives better. And I was so pleased to hear that this piece of legislation seems to be doing that. And so thank you all so much for all of your work and for helping make people's lives better.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, couple quick things, and then I promise technology, because that's what you're here for. But we also need to talk about some of these lasting questions around insurance, around licensure, around interstate activities.
Right.
So let's finish up a few things, and then we're going to head over to that direction, and then my colleagues are going to demonstrate some of this technology for you to see. So just some ideas about some audio issues, causes, and some video issues. So, lag is something that's where the audio and video are out of sync. That can be caused, it will be experienced as a response time delay, low bandwidth. So use one of those testers that we talked about to test your technology and ask your client to do the same to problem solve. And then echo will be, it sort of sounds like you're hearing yourself, like you're talking in a trash can. And that can be used, the common cause is that there are two mics. So the mic on your computer and maybe mic in a headset or something like that. So just making sure your connectivity between devices is consistent, so that should help. Or if you use headphones, oftentimes computers are smart enough that they'll sense the headphones and shut off the other audio. All right, best practices. Competency. This is a tricky one because we all know we're supposed to be competent in the areas we practice. But how many areas in graduate school were you trained in? a lot. You got a little sprinkling of trauma and a little sprinkling of CBT and a little sprinkling of DVT if you were lucky, and then maybe you've been to a conference because you like this or that. What makes you competent? There isn't a global definition of that. So be careful, proceed cautiously, ensure that you know how to handle a client with whatever presenting issues they are, and that you know how to translate that from your office into the virtual world. I'm going to strongly recommend that you bookmark the American Telemedicine Association's website. They have manuals that are the guidelines and best practices for telemental health. They have one for children and adolescents as well. They have a lot of other areas too, but those are two. The children and adolescent one is very new, and the other one is just a year or two behind. They represent good, solid, practical guidelines to base your practice around. So I'd recommend that you stay current in that. They do have an association that is interstate. I think it's not a cheap investment, but it is also one where providers can be really involved, and they consider that membership really collaborative. So there's opportunities to work across state lines with other professionals collaborating. We talked about that committing to checking insurance manuals and things like that every couple weeks. That's the world according to Sarah. That's not a guideline anywhere. I just don't want you to get behind, and it's a lot easier to find that there was a manual change or some sort of Medicaid update, and you've got 2 weeks of billing to correct rather than 2 months of billing to correct. So if you do find an error, make sure you go back to your billing professional and redact those claims, pull them back, submit new claims so that the claims on record for you are accurate and correct. All right, before you start telemedicine, you need to check with your insurance carrier to make sure they allow you to practice telemedicine. You should not be the first person that's ever asked this. This should be common for them. It is getting more common with insurance, but the questions you need to ask is, you need to ask about in-state and you need to ask about national. If you would like to practice internationally, or this is often offered in some of those online platforms where they credential you on their platform. International can be offered. Make sure you're covered. Okay, make sure you're covered. So you'll want to ask your carrier. If you have an opportunity to contract or work for the VA, the Department of Defense, or IHS, you become part of the Unicorn Club, and you may sort of be able to practice more liberally across state lines without actually being credentialed in each one of those. So if you work for those organizations, they can guide that practice. But licensing. The licensing rules that are out now that are generally accepted say you must hold a valid and current counseling license in your discipline in the state of your client's residency. So if that client's a New Hampshire that client is a New Hampshire resident and they're going to telemedicine you from New Hampshire, you must be licensed in New Hampshire. If they want to live in New Hampshire and they want to come to your office in Vermont, that's okay. It's not okay for telehealth though, right? So it is the client's state of residence that determines your license, where you must be licensed.
So if the client lives in Vermont, travels for 2 weeks to California, you can work with them in California?
That is a great question. The actual answer is, there is not a guideline that says, if this, then that. But that would be a generally accepted principle because that client's state of residency, their legal state of residency is Vermont. They're your Vermont client. You shouldn't have to seek a California license to see them for 2 weeks.
And is this a state law, state rule, or is this a national thing?
So it is state by state, but it is becoming, so we don't have national licensure yet. I think we're going to see it at some point with telehealth. But the states are now more aligning their licensure codes more to be very clear that those are for individuals practicing in their state. The national things that are coming down, for example, from the American Telemedicine Association, say that you must only practice in the states that you're licensed. So it is a place where licensure code and national norms are starting to overlap, but not everybody is quite there yet. So if you had a client that, for example, maybe relocated temporarily to Arizona, and they were going to work there for 3 months and then come home, you would want to call the Arizona licensing board and say, here's my situation, can I work with your client, can I work with my client while they're there, does this violate any of your current licensure laws? And you would want to check with Vermont. You would want to talk to both licensure boards and make sure they agree. This is an area where it is nationally accepted that you will only practice in states you hold a license. Nationally accepted that you will, the determining factor of where you hold a license is where that client lives. But it's still, there's some ideas of transition and clients and things like that are still, they may not be explicit in the licensure code yet.
So if this client who lives in New Hampshire, that's their address, they come to Vermont to see you.
Yep.
You really can't really see them because they don't live here? Even
So
though
you
they come-
can if you see them in your office.
Mhm.
Sure.
But not-
Absolutely.
What about if they're in Vermont when you're doing the telemedicine?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
They drive into Bennington.
If they drive into Bennington, I'm in the park and ride in Bennington. Let's have our session. Right. So I don't know the answer to that question, but these are those questions that we really want to be careful of in practice and we want to watch the regulations as they change very, very closely. When in doubt, call the licensure board that regulates your licensure type in that particular state for clarity, and then your licensure board for clarity here in Vermont too. Okay. All right, informed consent. So this process is the same when we are doing a telemedicine client as it is in your office. So I want you to consider a session of telehealth that you will be billing insurance for, or that you will be engaging in mental health work, just like your office. This client needs a file, and however you keep files, we keep electronic medical records in our office, so all of our stuff is in an electronic chart. If you keep paper charts, however you keep charts. A client should have a complete chart. And this beginning part being informed consent, where it's consistent with the same things that you are doing in your normal informed consent process. And here's the tricky part. If you decide to work in New York State, and you get a license in New York State, you need to know what is different between your license in Vermont and your license in New York State. They have some different reporting requirements. So for example, if you are working with individuals who have probation and parole, anybody licensed in New York? Nobody? If you're working with individuals who are on probation or parole, they have very limited rights to confidentiality, regardless of whether they seek a voluntary treatment or not. And you have extensive reporting obligations as a clinician, well beyond safety of patient and others. And it is a very, very clear process in New York, way different than Vermont. So that's a cautionary tale of if you're going to work in another state, you need to be involved with their board, involved with their professional organization. You need to know how they do counseling or how they do social work or how they do psychology or substance abuse there, so you don't step in any snake pits because you didn't know that you had to report to the parole officer that the client said he drank last night. Because we wouldn't normally do that in Vermont. So make sure you know whatever those local norms are. You also need to know if there's any differences in informed consent reporting in those states. Okay, so licensure boards are great sources of information, and so are professional organizations in those states. We talked about consent related to video conferencing. So fully inform the patient and explain how you do it. So this is how we do it. You're going to get on your computer, I'm going to get on mine, and you walk through that process. Consider that maybe having a 15-minute check-in at some point before sessions are going to start so that you can make sure the technology works for you and works for that client. We're going to hit these basic areas: privacy, right, and encryption, and then it's not foolproof. Right? It just isn't. Nothing is. You'll do your best, and you encourage the patient to do their best. If the patient doesn't care, it's like, I'm gonna go have a cup of coffee while we have our session, it's great. Then the patient is engaging in behaviors that are not going to preserve their privacy, and that is not on you. Right? So inform, document, and then the patient has the freedom to engage in that service as they will. Okay? Emergency management we'll talk a little bit about towards the end of the day. We're going to talk about how do we create protocols for managing an emergency, and what does that look like online. That's something, it's a collaborative process with your client, ensuring that there's a clear plan, that they agree to the plan, and that there is also current emergency contact information or a support person that you can contact in the family to go check on that person. Not every situation needs an ambulance or a first responder. Sometimes people just need people. Right? So that'll be part of that management. How data is stored, this is a great opportunity to talk about whether or not you're going to be doing any recording of sessions or not, and if there's going to be any data exchanged or stored in any way. And the policy for contact between sessions. So this is not uncommon in our practices. As I said, in our practice, we have a pretty straightforward way that we do that. You know, Monday through Friday, on the weekends, holidays, blah blah blah. We rarely get after hours calls in our practice. It's pretty unusual, but this telemedicine mimics some social interactions that patients have on a much more friendly level. So there's a great potential for those boundaries between professional and personal perception on the part of the patient to be blurred a little bit. I had a client, I was talking to a client's mom, trying to get a hold of her to get some collateral information. Called her in the evening, and it was 6:30, which I thought was appropriate. I said, oh, hi, it's Sarah White. This just happened the other day. Do you have a minute? You're interrupting our dinner, was what she said. You know, like, oh, hi, none of that. Yeah, you're interrupting our dinner. I said, oh, I'm sorry, can I make an appointment to talk to you maybe tomorrow? She said, yes, I'll be available between 8 and 10. Okay, so I'm in clinicals tomorrow. Do you have any chance you have an 11:45? And she said, yeah, that would be fine. I said, okay. Well, so I call her 11:45, voicemail, great. Left her my phone number, just said, call me, I'd like to connect with you today. She sends me a text. So I didn't tell her that it was my cell phone. She assumed it was my cell phone by her, right? So I said, I'll try to call you at 2:30. I called her at 2:30. I said this on my message. 2:30, she didn't answer the phone either. So I left her a message again and said, hey, I'll be in the office till 7. Could I call you? I don't want to interfere if that's too late. So she sends me a text back, sorry, work until 9. Right? So I'm leaving her voicemails, and she's texting me back. Right. And I'm feeling like, okay, where's this boundary here, and how am I going to work this out with this mom, who historically is a little avoidant from what I hear from other information. So clients understanding that they can't just have a video session with you anytime, that you're not just sitting behind your computer waiting for them to have a need. They wouldn't expect that if they were going to come to your office, but it's less of a process to pull this out, log onto the platform, and then let the phone ring. So set that up really carefully so that your clients know what the expectations are, so that that contact between sessions is reasonable for you, and within boundaries for them. Any questions about that?